Hello, everybody. It is October 2024, and today I am going to give you another chapter on the Storyworth book that my daughter Lydia has asked me to complete. I think it's mostly for a namesake for my granddaughter, to give her a chance to find out who her grandpa was as life proceeds. This is Gary Matheny, and today is not a regular episode of Liberty Observatory. It is an opportunity to respond to a question from Storyworth. And that question is, what's one of the most beautiful places you've ever seen? What is one of the most beautiful places you've ever seen? And this is probably changed from time to time during the course of my life. I like the river. I'm from Missouri. We love the rivers. We love our float streams in southern Missouri. You know, mountains are beautiful. The beach, a lot of beautiful, rugged beaches throughout the United States. And then if you go to some of the beaches in the Mediterranean, they're astoundingly beautiful. You know, some of these beaches that are like Greece and some of these other, Italy and some of these other Mediterranean countries, just beautiful, almost breathtaking beauty. But let me answer this question in a more practical sense. This may be because I'm a Western man and I'm an American, and I think probably too much into this question and just not look at it at the surface level and go, ooh, that is really pretty. But think about it a little bit more deeply as to what beauty I really appreciate. What do I like? And so the answer to the question for me is feel the sunflowers in Kansas. If you've never seen sunflowers at bloom in Kansas, I'm talking about a whole field of them. If you've never seen that, you should see it. It's absolutely astounding view to watch these sunflowers in bloom. Now, back in the 1970s, when I first started going to the Rockies, I went there probably 2 or 3 times, excuse me, in the 70s. And then I probably went a couple more times in the 80s. But in the 70s, remember I'm a Missourian, I hated Kansas. Kansas is like, it was in the way to get to the Rockies. You know, I wanted to be in Colorado. I wanted to be in the Rockies. I loved the Rockies. I loved the weather, you know, the dry weather, and in a beautiful area of the country. But Kansas was in the way, and so it added, like, I don't know, back in the 70s when they had a lower speed limit, I think it added about 8 hours to the drive. I don't remember that for sure, but it was tough to get through Kansas. So anyhow, there's no way in God's green earth in the 70s I would have pointed to anything in Kansas as being beautiful. But then the 1980s came along. And maybe by the time the 1980s came along, I was more of a capitalist, more practical in my perspective. Because I went to the Rockies with a friend of mine who had never been there before. And we drove through Kansas. And he absolutely hated it. He hated driving through Kansas in the 80s like I hated driving through Kansas in the 70s. But then my view was starting to change about Kansas, because we drive through Kansas, and we see these huge farm production, huge amount of fields. They got wheat, soy, heaven knows what other else they're growing in Kansas, but huge amount. And even in the hill country, you can see the cattle. So they're raising cattle for beef, and so in Kansas, they are putting the land to use to serve mankind. In other words, it's nice to have a loaf of bread when you go to the supermarket. Well, some farmer had to grow that wheat. May have been grown in Kansas, as far as I know. And so there was a more practical consideration given to Kansas, to which, in the 1980s, I was more congenial, because I realized it is a huge amount of production for human good in Kansas. And so basically, when I saw a field of sunflowers, and this could have been in the 80s or 90s, and it just absolutely stunned me, because it married something inside of me. Beautiful flowers, a field of flowers, which I assume was being grown primarily for either oil or sunflower seeds, but it met the aesthetic and the practical. And so whenever you have the aesthetic meet the practical, as far as Gary is concerned, I'm impressed. And what it reminds me of is Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison, one of the greatest inventors of all time, probably reached his peak in the very early part of the 20th century. And what he said was he was only interested in science as it drove the usefulness to man. In other words, as it had its practical application for the good of man. And so theory of relativity didn't have a whole lot of curiosity. And what's interesting, I'm told that Edison and Einstein had actually met each other, but they were more or less on the polar extremes of scientific thought. Edison was driven by practical consideration in his pursuit of science, and Einstein was theoretical. It is, to me, today, now I'm not a scientist, hard to comprehend what the theory of relativity has to do with my everyday life. I know it's important, I know it's there, it is a valid theory. In other words, it's not some wild-eyed speculation. But at the end of the day, if you look what Edison accomplished by combining the practical with the science, it has immensely improved our everyday life. Take, for instance, he harnessed electricity. Now, I know there was a competition between alternate current and direct current, and him and Tesla had a competition, and probably at the end of the day, Tesla was more practical, had a keener insight into how electricity worked. But at the end of the day, it is Edison that brought us the practical application of the harnessing of electricity. In other words, he lit up the cities. He brought us the lamppost that was driven by electricity and not by a mere flame which would burn oil. Another thing he did, he invented the phonograph. So all these beautiful sounds that we hear that we can stream any time of day. We can go on YouTube and listen to videos. Way back when, way back when, over 100 years ago. Edison was inventing the phonograph to reproduce sounds for the enjoyment for other people. So in summary, nature is beautiful. Almost all of nature is beautiful. But man's harnessing nature has its own beauty. And somewhere along the line, I combine the aesthetic with the practical when it comes to looking at God's most beautiful places. Thank you very much. Everyone have a good day.